CSIS 2470 is filmed before a live studio audience.
Welcome to class, everybody. Today we're going to take a brief look at timers and intervals in JavaScript. We'll look at how to delay actions and then how to create repeating tasks. It's kind of like giving our code the power to hit pause or play on command, right? And in fact, that's exactly what our code demo is going to do. So there ain't nothing to it but to do it. To the code. What we got here is just a simple little counter, and here is what it looks like on the screen right now. None of the code is built yet. We're going to do that in just a minute, but the HTML and CSS is already done. So what we want to do is when we click start, this counter 0 will start going 1, 2, 3. It'll just go up 1 every second. So it's going to be a counter counting however many seconds it's been running. When we click start, it will change to the word pause, and it will allow us to pause the timer. And then we're also going to have this reset button so we can reset the timer. So that's the basic idea. And there are only two functions that we really are going to need to do this. And so we're looking to do two different things. One, we want to set an interval. And the other one is we want to set a timeout. So setting an interval, all that does is say, hey, run this code every 10 seconds or every 3 seconds or every 500 milliseconds or whatever. So the function for that is called set interval, and we'll talk about the parameters for that in just a minute. And by the way, it is actually a window function, and you can call it this way, or you don't need it, the extension window, if you don't want to put it there, but you can call it that way. Then the other one is what's called a timeout, and it's just what you might think it would be. It's set timeout, right? Those are the two functions. We'll get to the timeout here in a minute, but for now, let's take a look at the set interval. All it does, it takes in two parameters. The first parameter is a function that's going to be run, and then the second parameter is how often to run that function, right? So we'll come back to this in a minute. Let's just sort of flesh out the program here that we're trying to do. We're going to be attaching event listeners to our buttons here. So let's do that real quick. Let's just start off with we'll call it the play pause button or something like that. We'll just call it play. And document.get element by ID. And I don't remember what I called it, so let's check again. I called it play pause, and then the other one's called start over. So play pause and start over. So this one, play pause. We have that one, and then the other one's the reset button, and we'll do the same. Get element by ID and start over. So now we have the two buttons here, and we're just going to attach event listeners to them, right? We've done this before. So play.add event listener, and we're also going to add one to the reset. They're both going to be looking for click events, right? Every time I click the button, we're going to do something, and it's going to call a certain function. The play button let's call the play pause function, and the reset we'll call the start over function, which doesn't exist yet. Neither of these exist yet. But that's pretty simple, straightforward stuff we've done a bunch of times now. So let's build out those functions, right? Simple enough. Function play pause, we'll start there. I'm going to go ahead and quickly create function start over so we don't get any errors when we run our code. All right, so now play pause. All right, so what's this function going to do? Well, the short version is we just want this number here to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the moment we click on the button, we're going to set an interval, right? So set interval, and it's going to call some function. We'll call it the counting function, and we want it to happen every 1 second. The default time that is taken in as a parameter is milliseconds. So we need to put 1,000 there. That's 1 second. And that's the basic way you do this. Now we have to create this counting function, and we need to think about quite a few things that are going to go in there. But the basic idea is we set this interval, and we're saying, hey, every 1,000 seconds, run whatever that code is. Well, what is that code in the counting function? It's going to increment a counter. It's going to set the display to equal whatever that counter value is. So function counting. And now right now we don't have a counter variable set up, so let's go ahead and make one right up here. We'll just do it right here. Let counting equals 0. And then right here in the counting function, we'll say counting plus plus. And we can also, just for the moment, console.log counting. So what I want to show you in the console here in just a second is that the moment I click the button here, the play button, it's just going to keep counting in the console, right? So here we go. Every 1 second, open up the console, click refresh. And when I click start, we will get an error first. Identifier counting has already been declared. Yeah, that's because I have a function called counting and a variable called counting. So we'll call this counter, just what I meant to do anyway. Counter, sorry about that. So we have the counting function. So one more time, we've attached this event handler to the play button, and when they click it, it's going to run this function, which is going to set an interval. What does that interval do? Every 1 second, it's going to run that function, which is this function right here. So let's take a look at what that looks like. We refresh, no error. I click start, and after 1 second, every second you'll see it's just going to keep going over there on the console. Okay, so let's start over here, clear that. We don't want it to print on the console, we want to print it on our screen, right? Well, that is that guy right there. So let's target it. That's easy enough. We can do our document query selector. We want the div, timer, and then the span inside of that. So let's do it. We got right here, let display equal document dot query selector, and it's the span dot, I already forgot, class of timer on a div. Sorry about that. So div dot timer span, right? That's just a regular old CSS selector there. Now I have the display, and right here, rather than consoling, I can just say display dot text content is equal to the counter. That's all there is to it to make the counter work. Now we got some functionality we want to build with all those buttons and everything, but this is a great starting point. So if I refresh now and I click start, after 1 second delay, it starts counting, and it'll keep counting every 1 second, and it'll just do that forever until we build in something to stop it, right? All right, I'm going to refresh that so we don't keep running it. The next thing I want to happen though is change that text from start to pause, okay? And there's lots of ways to do it. You can look at what the text is and then change it. So if text equals pause, change to start. If text equals start, change to pause, right? You can do it like that. I don't like using the text value itself though as a conditional. I prefer to have some sort of a state variable or something like that. So we're going to put here on line 14 a state attribute, data-state, and we'll just set it equal to paused, because that's how the game will start. It will start in the paused state. Now in our code, we can look for that, look for the data state. So the moment we click the button, we want to check and see what is the state. If it's in one state, we want to do one thing. If it's in a different state, we want to do a different thing, right? So we already have the play button. We can look at it and say, if the play button, the attributes array, data state, node value, don't forget the node value, I often do. If it's equal to paused, then we're going to do one set of instructions, else we're going to do a different set of instructions, right? Well, what's one of the things we want to do? A simple thing is just changing the node value. If it's in the paused state and they just push the button, we want to change it to the playing state or the running state or something like that, right? So we'll say it's in the playing state. And then we just toggle back and forth between those two, back to paused, right? But we don't want to just change the state. We also want to change the value of the button's text itself. So we can do that. Play dot text content is equal to pause. So when it says start, that means we haven't clicked start, and so it's in the paused state. So if it's in the paused state, we want to change it to the playing state, and then we want to change the text to say pause. In other words, click here to pause, right? And then we want to do the opposite over here. So we'll change that to start again, right? We're going to change where we put this set interval in just a minute, but I want to make sure we understand what's going on with the button here first. So I refresh it, and when I click start, it should change to the word pause, and it does. And then when I click pause, it should change to the word start. Now I haven't done anything to actually interact with the counter yet, so the counter is going to keep going. But I want to show one last thing here, which is I want to console log this right here. I want to print out the node value so we can see that we are toggling things in the background as well. All right, so we refresh it, and I click start and watch the console, and it says it's playing, and I click pause, and it says that it's paused, right? Which is exactly what we want. So that state attribute is being changed every time we click the button. Okay, so now let's delete this. In the event that it was paused, that's when we want to set the interval. So we'll put that right there. If it is not paused, if it was in the playing position and we click the button, then we want to stop the counting, right? Well, how do we stop the counting? Well, for each of these functions, set interval, and then the other one we're going to look at in a minute called set timeout, there's a counterpart called clear. So there's clear interval and clear timeout. So we're going to clear the interval. Well, in order to do that, we have to get the interval's ID. And every interval when you create one, it actually returns an ID, like a unique ID for that session in that window. And it's just an ID that you can access and use it to cancel the timer later if you need to. So we'll just make let timer ID, and we'll just have it be empty. And then when I set the interval, sorry, I meant to say let interval ID. When I set the interval, I'm going to assign it right here, interval ID equals that. Now, just for explanation purposes, I'm just going to console that interval ID out so we can see exactly what it looks like. All right, refresh. And when I click start, remember when I click start, because it's currently in the paused position, right? That's the default when we load the page. So when I click start, that's clicking this button, which calls this function, and it checks for the state, and it says if it's in the paused state, which it is, then change it to the playing state, change the button to say pause, set an interval and assign it to this variable, and then just for teaching purposes, go ahead and console it out. So here we go, refresh, click start, and that's the ID, right? Just one, okay? All right, so now that we have the interval, we can do something with it. What do we want to do with it? Well, right here in the else statement, I want to just clear it, right? So we clear interval, and it's the interval ID, which was 1 in our case, right? So when I push the button again, it should clear it. So let's refresh. Now it's not going to clear the window. It's not going to change the value that's in our screen. It's just going to stop the counter from counting, right? So let's go ahead and start, and let's just watch it count up a few times. And then I click pause, and you notice it stopped at 4. It didn't keep going. So the interval stopped. Well, remember, the first thing we did when we clicked the button here, after we changed all of our text and everything, is we set this interval which says, hey, every 1 second, 1,000 milliseconds, call the counting function. All right, so until the end of time, every 1 second, this counting function is going to fire. Well, what does it do every 1 second? It increments a variable, and then what's it do right after it increments? It changes what's on the screen. It's going to do that forever, every 1 second, unless I clear the interval. So I did clear the interval right there. And so that happened when I clicked the pause. Now that the interval's cleared, this just stops running. Well, that doesn't change what the counter value was at the time of clearing the interval, right? The counter value still is whatever the counter value was when we clicked pause. And the display text content is whatever it was when we clicked pause. Okay, so now we have this basic functionality here. I can start, and then I can pause it. When I go to click start again, it'll take 1 full second before it runs, but then it'll just keep going. 5, 6, 7. It'll just keep counting. Because remember, it's going to fire that function every 1 second, and that function just increments the counter that happened to be set at 4 when we paused last time. Now we paused at 12. So right now, if I were to print out the counter variable, you could see it's set at 12, right? When I click start again, what's it going to do? Well, because it's in the paused state, it's going to change this to playing, it's going to change the words to pause, and it's going to fire off this set interval function, which is going to call that counting function every 1,000 milliseconds. So it's going to increment the counter to 13, and it's going to display 13, and then it's going to wait a second and do it again, right? So here we go, start, and there we go. So now let's build the reset button here. All I want to do when I click the reset button is the same thing. I want to clear the interval, but I also want to reset the value to 0. So pretty straightforward here. We have the reset button right here. It's going to click the start over event. All right, so let's just make that. I think we've already got it here. Let's move it up so we can play with it up here. What we want to do with the start over is first just start by resetting the counter to 0. Right, let's just start there. Counter equals 0. All right, so when we refresh now, refresh, start, let's let it get to a few here, and then when we click reset, it's going to turn it back to 0, but because that timer is still going, it's still calling that counting function every 1 second, it's just going to keep going. So if I click reset again, it's just going to go back to 0 and keep going. So we want to go back to 0, and we want to clear all the timers and set it back as if we refresh the page, right? So counter equals 0, that's good. Before we do that though, let's clear the interval, right? So clear interval and interval ID. So we could clear the interval, set the counter equal to 0, and then below that we'll say display.text content equals counter. So this will clear the interval, so it'll stop calling that counting function. it'll set that counter variable to 0, and then it will display 0 on our screen. But we're not quite done, but let's start there. Refresh, start, it's going, it's going, it's going. I click reset. It stopped everything. The interval's clear. It's not calling the counting function anymore, but our button says pause there. That's not good. If I click on it, it's not going to work right? It's confused. It didn't do anything because we didn't reset that button. So we also need to reset the button, which means we basically need to do this right here. Now, there is a better way to do this where we maybe write another function that handles this so that I'm not duplicating code here. But for now, just for the sake of understanding how this stuff works, we're just going to duplicate our code. So we're going to reset this back to the default behavior as if we reloaded the page, where we set it to the paused state and the start text in the button. And that should be everything. Refresh, we click start. It's saying pause, which means if I click it, it'll pause. And now it's saying start, waiting for me to click it again. And then if I hit reset, it should clear this back to 0 and change that to say start. Reset, and this does say start again. And if I click start, it should work again. And there we go. Let's look at one last thing here. What if we didn't want to allow the reset button to be active until maybe 5 seconds have passed, right? So let's go in here and disable it by just typing right here, disabled. That's just an HTML attribute right there, right? But now when we refresh the page, that's disabled. So I can hover and it still has a hover effect, but it won't click. Let's actually get rid of the hover effect too. And this is a really cool thing. If you don't know about it, it's a good thing to know. So let's check this out in our CSS. Right now, I just have a simple hover effect down here where when I hover over the button, it changes the color of the outline to dark green. Right down here, I set the outline to 5 pixels solid transparent. And then when I hover, it changes it from transparent to dark green. And then I have a transition that waits 300 milliseconds to do that. Well, what I could do is rather than doing a hover on all buttons, I can only do hover on buttons, say, for example, that have the disabled property, right? This is using the attributes selector. Now, this is the opposite of what we want, but I'll show you how to fix it in a second. So now when I refresh, the hover will not work on the start, but it will work on this one. That's the opposite of what we want, right? But I just want to point out, though, if I target all buttons that have the disabled attribute, when those buttons are in the hover state, then this code will run, which is exactly what we have going here, which is why the reset works, but start doesn't. How do we reverse that? Well, easy. There's a pseudo class called not. So let's get rid of this disabled part for just a second here. And we have just back to where we were a minute ago, button hover. Now, look at this. If you're a button, you are styled this way. But I can also say something like this. If you're a button, but you don't have the disabled. So let's just put that in there. What this will do is say, if you are not disabled, then do this, right? So that means the disabled button is going to have no style to it, right? Now, again, this is not the effect we're going for, but I just want to show you how that worked before I convolute it by adding one more piece to it. So we're saying style all buttons that do not have whatever's in this parentheses. I could have done anything in here. I could say that do not have the ID of this, right? So let's try that. I could say, what is it? The ID was play pause. So I could say that don't have the ID of play pause. So only style buttons that don't have play pause as the ID. Well, that styles the other way, right? So the not is a really cool pseudo class, but we're going to use it up here. We're going to say, give me all of the buttons that are not disabled that are also in the hover state. So if you are disabled, then you don't get to apply the hover. But if you're not disabled, then you get to apply the hover. So refresh, and now the hover works back here, but it doesn't work here anymore. So sorry, there's a little bit of a tangent there, but if you don't know about the not pseudo class, that's a really good one to know because it can be very useful for stuff like this. Okay, so what we want to do though is go from disabled to enabled after 5 seconds, right? So let's take a look at what we got here. Once we start the play button here, rather than setting an interval, we can set a timeout. The difference between the two is this. An interval says every 1 second, or whatever you put here for the time, call this function. Now, part of that means wait 1 second before you call it, right? So delay 1 second, call counting. Delay 1 second, call counting. Delay 1 second, call counting ad infinitum, right? Okay, a timeout is different. It's just wait some number of time and then call the function 1 time. That's it. So set timeout, and we're going to call the enable button function, I guess, right? Enable button, but we're not going to do it for 5 seconds. So let's make the enable button function. Easy enough. We'll just put it right here. Function enable button. What does it do? Simple. It takes the button, which we called reset, and sets its disabled property to false. All right, let me show you that before we run it. Over here, if you look down here at the buttons, here's a button right here. If I click on it, go down and look at the properties, you'll see disabled is set to true. If I look at the play pause button, disabled is set to false, right? Well, this one's set to true because we set it that way in our HTML. So we just want to change that to false. That's it. That's the whole thing we need to do, but we want to wait 5 seconds, right? So let's refresh, close that out, click start, and when it gets to 5, you'll notice the reset button will become available. And there it is. But there is a little bit of a problem here. If I refresh, when I click start, I'm going to pause it before we get to 5, right here on 3. But the reset button still becomes available after 5 seconds. Well, that's not the behavior I want. I want to make sure that the count on the screen gets to at least 5 before that reset button appears. So whenever I pause the screen, if I'm below 5 or whatever our limit is we're going to use, then I want to stop the timeout from continuing to count and wait. So we want to cancel it, right? Or clear it. So you'll recall right here we had this let interval ID. Let's just make a timeout ID. And then down here, when we set this timeout right here, we're going to set it equal to that timeout ID. And so now we have an ID here that is equal to the ID that was created with this set timeout. Well, now that I have that, I can actually clear it with the clear timeout function. Just like we have the clear interval function, we have a clear timeout function. And we can also use that. So what do I want to do here? Right here in our else statement, when we are pausing everything, we want to just also clear that timeout. So we clear the interval, and we're going to clear timeout with that timeout ID we created a minute ago. And so that will stop the countdown of 5 seconds from happening. Even if we're at like 4.3 seconds, the moment I do this, it stops the counting and it no longer will ever make it to the 5 seconds because it stopped. So let's take a look. Refresh, start, wait for it to get to 4, and we pause, and this never happened. But then if I click start, it's going to start the 5 second delay again. So I click start, it's going to go 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and by then that was 5 more seconds. Then the reset button became available. So this whole thing is a silly exercise that doesn't really have that much use, but it's kind of a fun thing, and it helps us understand better how these things work. And this isn't a ton of code, but it's more than you might think it would be to do something as simple as pausing and resetting a timer. So there you go, 42 lines of code. It's true, this little timer is the meaning to life, the universe, and everything. Now, if you want to see a more interesting example, there's a bonus video you can watch, not required, but you can, where we take our little robot donut eater and we give it a time limit. You might want to check that out because it would be useful in an upcoming assignment you have. But it's just a bonus video right here in the lecture. If you want to watch it, great. If you don't, that's okay too. Anything in that video won't be on the quiz. I mean, it will be, but the answers are also here in this video, right? So that's it. That's timers, that's intervals. There's a lot more to it, and there's better syntax that we're going to learn later when we get into more advanced function stuff. But the basics are covered here, and now you have a basic idea of how to use these things. One thing I'll point out to you, since you waited this long to the end of the video here, line 30 and 31, where we're clearing the intervals, I should say, and clearing the timeout. Believe it or not, those functions are interchangeable. I can use clear interval to clear a timeout and vice versa. However, best practice is to not do that. Best practice is use clear interval to clear a set interval and use clear timeout to clear a set timeout. That's the best practice. But if you look at the documentation that's listed in the lecture notes, you can see a lot more details about that and how that works. And again, we'll look at some different syntax in a future lecture that will help better organize our timeouts and our intervals. But for now, you got the gist. So as always, thanks for coming to class. And if you can answer those questions on the screen right there, then you are ready to take the quiz and you've learned what you needed to learn from this video. We'll see you next time, folks.